Hey everybody, Who's Your Jedi here with another review for you. This time I'm going to be talking about episode 10 of season 1 of The Legend of Korra. Well folks, we're just before the end game. Next week is our big season finale with the 1 hour special. So it's probably not really surprising that this is mostly a plot episode. And I do have quite a bit to say about the plot, but let's dive in and let's talk about the character stuff that was going on here first. And I think that in terms of characterization, the two people that were getting the most spotlight this episode are Asami and Lin. So let's talk about Asami here. Now, as we've been seeing, that slowly that the jealousy that Asami has for whatever is going on with Mako and Korra, it's been growing. And here's the point where it has gotten to the point that Asami feels the need to confront Mako about this. And I'm really glad that they didn't really spend a whole lot of time dithering about this, like this was some sort of a sitcom. Unfortunately for both himself and Asami, Mako sort of tries to blow the whole thing off, and he does so immediately after showing some concern that Korra was out of tea. Well, first of all, Mako was definitely not really helping his case there, but just the fact that he says, "Can we talk about this later?" when it is blindingly clear that Asami wants to talk about this right now. Now, of course, in Mako's defense, this is what's going on out there in the wider world is extremely serious, but there is no immediate danger here. And just the fact that he even says that to Asami in the way he did is honestly extremely disrespectful of her feelings and her as his girlfriend. Now, again, he really could have just saved himself a lot of misery right there if he had just said, like, "Look, I understand that this is something you want to talk about. I understand you want to have a discussion about this. I understand this, but we're really in a crisis here. So, can this wait until afterwards?" Now, granted, that's not the ideal solution, but at least in that scenario, Mako is acknowledging that is at least in some way giving some genuine acknowledgement to Asami's feelings. In what he does, he just really does more or less sort of, in a way, dismiss her. And of course, this isn't his intention, but that's how it makes her feel. And you could see in the aftermath of all of that Mako realizes he's blown it pretty badly. But I think we have to grant Mako a pretty fair bit of slack here. Keep in mind, this guy is 16 years old, and it's fairly safe to say this is the first time he's ever had a real relationship. And honestly, him acting that way towards Asami, that's something that even adults who have been through several relationships in their lives would do. And not, of course, in a way to be vindictive or cruel to their partner. It's just simply not choosing their words wisely and simply not giving sufficient consideration to the other person's feelings. And as I was watching this episode, something was sort of that really struck me, especially when we were at the very end and we see all of our heroes kind of gathered together in that little pipe. That, as they said so eloquently on the modern Battlestar Galactica, all of this has happened before, and all of this will happen again. We see the dynamic in this episode between Pema and Lin and Tenzin coming back and being genuinely important to what is going on around them. And now here we have that dynamic between Mako, Korra, and Asami. So in a way, it is history repeating itself. Only instead of the non-bender beating out the bender this time around, it seems to be the benders coming together, with Asami being the odd one left out. And this certainly does make for some very good storytelling, but honestly, I kind of wonder, and I'm sure there are lots of folks who are, of course, bucking for Korra and and Mako to be together by the end of the season. And if what I've seen on the internet is any indication, there are even some people who are bucking for Korra and Asami to get together by the end of the season. But folks, if you're in that contingent of shipping, I'm guessing you're probably going to end up very disappointed. But anyway, I have to say that I think in terms of storytelling, that just isn't going to happen because, okay, let's say that whatever happens in the next couple episodes happens. Korra and Mako just says, "Yeah, Asami, sorry, it's not working out. Korra's gonna go and be my girlfriend now." Well, first of all, if he was just to immediately drop Asami and get together with Korra, one, that would be just flat out cruel. I mean, you drop someone and like 5 minutes later you're with someone else, especially someone who has fought by your side, who you have had a genuinely loving and strong relationship. And if Korra was to go for that, well, gee, what a rotten friend to Asami she would be being there. And that's not who Mako and Korra are. They are flawed people, but at their hearts, they are good people. And while Korra and Asami do not share the strongest of bond, and you could even make the case that they're maybe not exactly friends. They do care about each other. They're at the very least comrades in arms, especially now that, well, what you can really only call a revolution, a war, a coup, whatever you want to call it, has flat out broken out. So if they were to go in that, I think it would really just be not just cruel to Asami as on an emotional level. It would be a genuine disservice to Mako and Korra's characters, who they are, because they are not the sort of people who would do something like that to someone that they care about. But anyway, speaking of all of this has happened before, and all of this will happen again. Let's move her over and talk about Lin. First of all, while it's pretty apparent that Toph taught Lin a lot of her really unique and extremely cool earth and metal bending skills, apparently she also taught Lin how to well, in Toph's case, it was almost single-handedly. In Lin's case, it genuinely was single-handedly taught her how to destroy an airship. Man, Toph must have been like the coolest mom in the world. My mom never taught me anything that cool. I think the coolest thing my mom ever taught me was how to tie my shoes. But and I don't mean that as a knock on my mom. She's great. But anyway, let's move on here. So as I said, we do see that dynamic of her and Tenzin and Pema coming up. We do see that there is still a little bit of animosity, and actually maybe not even animosity. That really does seem to be too strong a word. It's just a little bit of resentment, a small amount of resentment between Pema and Lin lingering. Then again, when you consider that Lin tried to have Pema thrown in jail for dating her ex-boyfriend, well, sticking Lin with a kid who is has a little bit gross bathroom habits does seem a fairly mild sting on Pema's part towards Lin. And this, I think, in a lot of ways, really was where we get to see more of Lin's character than just about anything else this season. Now, granted, Lin's had some really great character moments, but here we do see that genuine. It is made very clear that while there may be, again, a little bit of resentment lingering, what Tenzin and Lin have been through in the last weeks or whatever time is going on here timeline-wise, it's pretty much erased that. And while there may have been a little bit of lingering resentment, just old bad feelings that are a natural part of human relationships, Lin, for whatever minor resentment she may have lingering, whatever her own personal flaws as a character, is still an extremely moral person, and that her feelings, her caring about Tenzin for who he is, for someone who is an important person in her life, is there, and that she doesn't extend that animosity, that resentment, to any real degree to Pema, and she certainly doesn't extend it even a little bit to Tenzin's children. So again, this really does speak to the strength of Lin's character, the strength of her morality. And as we have seen, she is certainly not anyone to be trifled with in the realm of bending. She is almost certainly one of the most powerful, one of the most skilled benders in Republic City. And that sacrifice she makes at the end, knowing when she goes off to take down the airships, knowing that she'll almost certainly either die or be captured, and of course knowing full well what the results of being captured are. And I look at this and I can't help but think that this is something that really would have been instilled with her in her mother. Look at what happens with the big battle on the airship in the original series. Now, nobody really dies there. There is no big, I will hold them off while you escape moment. But Toph was there, and she did see that the victory there did come with a price for Sokka. Sokka lost his boomerang, he lost Space Sword, and it was even said, I believe in the commentary by the creators, that a victory like that had to come at a price. Well, here we have the Equalists striking back at the only remaining airbenders in the world. If Amon takes the bending away from Tenzin and his family, that is genuinely going to irrevocably, not immediately, but eventually, end the Avatar cycle. So it is pretty much safe to say that, yeah, what Sokka had to lose in that battle, and of course the importance of making sure that the Avatar cycle continues, is something that I can't help but think was impressed heavily on Lin as she was growing up. And you can see that she makes that decision knowing full well the consequences, and she doesn't really hesitate. She just looks back and she sees Tenzin's family, and she sees, and this isn't put in any words, it's entirely there. And I admit, this is just me giving an interpretation of a scene, but I think it's one that is pretty obvious to anyone who's really thinking about it. She turns around and she looks at Tenzin family, and she sees what could have been. And it was something that it didn't happen. It did not work out that way. But that loving and important family, the people, these children that Lin does care about, even though they are not hers, they are still worth sacrificing herself for. It is still with, I completely lost my train of thought there. Well, anyway, I think I've made my point clear. She saw something that could have been, and even though it didn't work out for her and Tenzin, this family that was created is still important to her. And just like any mother would, Lin is willing to sacrifice herself to see that this family, is protected, to see that these children are protected. And of course, this all leads to her being captured by Amon, who makes her the offer that if she tells him where they're going, he'll spare her bending. Well, first of all, if you believe that, if you believe what Amon is selling there, then I've got a bridge in Brooklyn I'm willing to sell you. So I'm glad that they don't even waste more than just a few token words on that. And of course, then we see Amon take Lin's bending. Now, this gets me this gets me thinking. But before I explain, I delve a little bit into the realm of theory. I want to come back to what I had said earlier about sacrifice. And here I had talked about Sokka and Space Sword and Boomerang. Well, here we see Lin making that sacrifice that I mentioned earlier. She knew what she was potentially giving up, either her life or her bending, one or the other. And they're faced with that 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 loss. Lin didn't even blink. So again, we have to give her an enormous amount of credit for her character, her inner strength. But anyway, going on with that, seeing that scene kind of got me thinking. Now we've repeatedly been told that the role of the Avatar is to bring balance to the world, and people have been wondering, well, how can Korra bring equality to Republic City? Well, I've been thinking about that, and the big question, the $10,000 question, I think is, given what we've seen in these episodes and what we have seen in the previews for the next one, is while we do know that the Avatar can take away bending, we've seen it done twice by Aang with Yakone and Ozai. Can the Avatar's power restore bending? Can it reverse whatever has been done by Amon? And while I think it would be extraordinarily interesting in terms of storytelling to have Lin continue on next season as a character adjusting to life without bending, I can't help but think that maybe that the answer to that question will be yes, because the Avatar is about restoring balance. The key word there being, of course, restoring. Benders are a natural part of the world, so if you remove them from it, doesn't it make sense that the world will be out of balance? So if the Avatar has the ability to take away bending to restore balance, then doesn't it follow that the Avatar should have the ability to restore bending in order to excuse me, in order to restore balance? And if that's the case, then while this isn't something I normally do, I did have an idea, and I think it's just too interesting not to share. Next season, of course, we're probably whatever happens, we're almost certainly going to have Bolin and Mako continue at Korra's side as part of the new Team Avatar. And while Bolin, of course, is very talented as an earthbender, he certainly does have the strength, he's basically not really learned anything earthbending-wise from that he didn't pick up on the streets or that he didn't pick up at the bending arena. On the other hand, right here, we have someone he knows personally and who is tied strongly to the Avatar, someone who, as I have said, almost certainly has to be one of the best earthbenders in the entire city, if not the entire world. Interesting, isn't it? Kind of wonder why they haven't tapped Lin as a resource in that regard previously. Of course, given everything that's going on, I'm sure Lin's had her hands full with other things than teaching some kid she doesn't really know all that well her best bending tricks. But now we are also introduced to Iroh II, or I shall call him. And, now we have someone who is almost certainly an extremely good firebender. And we also have Mako, who is no slouch as a firebender, but again, he's mostly learned his firebending from picking it up on the streets and what he's learned at the bending arena. So, isn't that interesting? Isn't that an interesting possibility? And of course, it is a humongous, humongous thrill to have Dante Bosco back playing Iroh, who almost certainly will turn out to be Zuko's grandson. As I've said in my previous videos, I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to anything any information that was really released about things that were going to happen in advance. I'm not a spoiler person, but I did hear when the show was in production him say in an interview that he had done some voice work for a character who was related to Zuko. So here we have that character quite obviously. And like everybody else, I think that Iroh is going to be an extremely interesting addition to the cast, and of course, we all certainly want to see um, elderly Zuko, who it has been confirmed is still out there wandering the Earth as an ambassador of peace. So, something to look forward to next year. But with that said, wow, I've been talking for 20 minutes, and I thought I only had a little bit to talk about the characters. I got a whole bunch of notes to hear about the plot, so let's jump right into it and start talking about the plot of this episode. Well, for one thing, it is even stated that this is Amon's endgame. He has slowly been working himself up towards this. He starts off with some criminals. He moves into attacking a sporting event and taking on some cheaters. Then he flat out challenges the cops. He then moves on up to striking against the city council. Here he captures and takes out the rest of the city council, except for Tenzin, who demonstrates that, wow, he's can seriously kick some real butt with airbending. I was extraordinarily impressed by Tenzin's combat abilities in this episode. He is not a man to be taken lightly, that is for sure. And then it jumps onto, moving back to the end game. We see Amon flat out, leading the Final Fantasy airship invasion of Republic City, starting what is really partially a terrorist attack and partially a full-on blitzkrieg. I mean, they've been pushing the Nazi vibe, along with, of course, various other evil organizational moves throughout the series. But here, yeah, folks, this is genuinely a real, again, to use the word, a real blitzkrieg. And if you really stop and think about what we're seeing, I mean, we are seeing airships crashing into the middle of majorly populated cities here. Now, they're not really showing anything here, but you have to think that a lot, and I mean a lot, of people are dying in all of this chaos. So, right there, that is some pretty heavy stuff. Not that they don't take the moments or two to lighten things up. We get, Bolin making a few jokes. We get to see Tenzin's kids, screwing around. We get to see poop and fart jokes from Milu. I'm getting a little tired of that, although I will give the show credit that they have been slowly showing more of his character beyond the fact that he's weird and kind of gross. So, points to the creators for that. We also, of course, get to see Hiroshi again. He's naturally still concerned about Asami. Boy, I really can't help but think, what is going through Hiroshi's mind. Sorry I helped these guys take over the city and hurt your take away your friend's bending and kill your little friend Korra. But hey, give Daddy a hug. But of course, love is not a rational thing. Hiroshi is driven by irrational love and even more irrational hatred. And Amon, of course, is exploiting this all fully. Let's actually talk a little bit about the big fight with the mechs in this episode. I was a little put off by just how much more effective the fighting against the mechs was in this episode. But of course, there is a perfectly rational explanation for all of that. The first time we see benders versus the mechs, except for Tenzin, it's entirely metal benders who don't realize that because they're made of platinum. Well, I've already talked about the impractical aspect of that. They just This is the first time dealing with them, so of course they don't know what works and what doesn't. One would have to assume in the time that has happened since then, Tenzin and Lin and everybody else have genuinely taken some time to put some thought into, okay, how can we fight these mechs and do so effectively? So it's not, I mean, it does make sense if you take a moment or two to think about it, but I just don't like the fact that it was quite as easy as it was. Now, not that Tenzin didn't have a good fight. He was, in fact, even ultimately defeated by some mechs. But I think maybe they just swung a little too far in the opposite direction. But we did see a new aspect of lightning bending that apparently, if you're skilled enough in it, you can absorb a certain amount of electricity and shrug it off. Now, we have seen, of course, that Iroh and other very skilled fire and lightning benders can redirect lightning, but we've never seen the ability to absorb it. Now, is this something that's just another aspect of firebending that has been of lightning bending that has been refined in the last 70 years? Or is this something that is a testament to Mako's unique level of skill? I don't know, but let's move on to something else. One other, of course, in this episode we get to see Pema give birth to a new kid, a son who, if I heard right, was named Rohan, as in Riders of Rohan. What news from the north? Yeah, okay, whatever. I once saw a clothing store in Japan that was named Rohan, so okay. Anyway, I have to say, while I do think that did bring a needed moment of lightness, a moment of hope, of genuine familial warmth to what is genuinely an extremely dark episode, Pema and what happens here does bring me to something that genuinely bugs me about a lot of TV shows and movies. I think it was the movie critic Roger Ebert who once said, in discussing the movie Fargo, whose main protagonist is a pregnant female sheriff investigating a murder. And incidentally, if you've never seen it, Fargo really is a very good movie. Do check it out. He mentions that in movies and TV shows, pregnant women pretty much exist solely to give birth. Now, Fargo, tiny spoiler, is an exception to that. But here, it does seem to play into that. Now, granted, we have seen more of Pema as a character. We've seen her giving advice and other things. So she is genuinely a decently developed character. But what happens here does play into another extremely common and, honestly, at least to me, annoying cliche that you see in regards to pregnant women in fiction, and that is that they will always go into labor and give birth at the most inconvenient and ridiculous time possible. Now, I'm not going to really gripe at the show too much for the fact that Pema seemed to give birth to and recover and be in recovery from it in what seemed to be the span of less than 20 minutes. Now, granted, the amount of time it takes for a woman to give birth does, of course, vary, but usually, as I understand it, it takes a couple hours. It does not take what would for most people be the time it would take to walk down to the local Starbucks, have a coffee, and then walk back home. Okay, I'm pretty sure it does take longer than that. But of course, this is only a 20-some-odd minute TV show, and we're going with what makes sense the most in terms of storytelling, pushing a few inconvenient aspects of human biology aside. But again, Pema, of course, has to give birth in the middle of all this big blah 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 war drama. Blah, blah, blah. I don't know. I understand why it was done, because it does give us that needed moment of lightness, of love, and even of hope. but it does so by really just going for one of the big old-timey cliches. So, there is my criticism of that. And while this was all going on, I couldn't help but think of Pema's words earlier in the season when she mentions how much she would like to have just one of her children be a non-bender. Well, here we're presented with a situation where all of her children and her husband might end up non-benders. And needless to say, Pema is, of course, along with everyone else, pretty darn terrified by all of this. And not just because doing that would end the Avatar cycle. This would, of course, be an incredible violation of Tenzin and his and Pema's children. The difference being, of course, that if one of the children was simply born a non-bender, it was just because that was what nature had decided for that child. If the bending was taken away like by Amon, then that would be a decision someone else not only made for the family, but forced upon them. And no one wants to see decisions or terrible things forced on their loved ones. But I couldn't help but wonder if maybe, just for a moment, the writers weren't toying with the idea of giving Pema what she wanted, but in the worst possible way. And while the show is pretty darn dark this season, and heck, darker even than the previous show in certain respects, I don't think the show is ever going to go quite that dark. But let me see here. Is there anything else I wanted to talk about? No. Oh, right. I wanted to talk about the question of how does Korra restore balance, restore equality to Republic City. And this fits in actually with what I was talking about just a second ago. And I want you guys to think back about Tano and how we saw him after he had his bending taken away. He genuinely did seem to be a broken man. And now here, according to what we were told by the nerdy, I guess it was the nerdy little official guy, or the police chief, I can't remember which, everyone on the city council, except for Tenzin, has had their bending taken away. So now, not just the city council, but given what we've seen over the course of the show and stuff that's going to happen in the next few episodes, benders of all levels across the city are going to understand what it is like to have their bending taken away. They are going to understand what it is like to not have that power in the world in which they have built. They are going to know what it is like to be, honestly, to be oppressed, to be targeted simply for who and what you are by people who hate you just because you are different. Now, again, in Republic City, the non-benders do have very legitimate grievances to take up with the benders who rule the city. Again, that is the operative word. They have grievances against the ruling class of the city. But again, and this is important to remember, and Mako and Bolin are prime examples of this, not everyone who is a bender is a member of the ruling class. So in any case, we are going to see the people who have genuinely, with exceptions of course, been the ones running the show. They are going to have had the experience of seeing what it is like on the other side of the tracks, of that feeling of fear, that feeling of powerlessness. And honestly, regardless of whether or not Korra does gain the ability to restore bending to these people like the city council, well, they're not going to be removed, as far as I know, from their jobs simply because they lose their bending. They are people with skill and experience that the city needs, especially given what's happened. They are going to need, one way or the other, experienced leaders to put the city back in order once this is all over. But those people are going to have gained painful but perhaps tragically necessary perspective on how the other half live. And of course, the non-benders in the city are going to see people that they know, neighbors, co-workers, probably certainly even friends and family members, targeted just because of who they are. And I mean, let's say that you are an ordinary person in this city, but maybe your wife or your husband, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your cousin is a bender. Do you want to see them grabbed by goons and have a piece of what their soul, their spirit, their very nature as human beings taken away from them? Well, I can't really imagine that many people would feel that that would be a positive thing to see that happen to people that they care about. Now, again, the non-benders do have legitimate grievances, but I can't imagine that the majority of people in the city, the majority of them who I would genuinely like to think are good, would not want to see their grievances redressed by violence, by harming other people, because honestly, that's really not how most people are. So I would think that after all of this, after seeing their genuine grievances taken to such an extreme, to see all the suffering that it has brought, I can't imagine that they wouldn't want to come together, to be willing to meet the benders at least halfway. And to kind of go back to the Nazi metaphor, look at the way people in Germany reacted once the details of the Holocaust had become widespread and undeniable public knowledge. They were, of course, horrified. Now, remember, you have to think, one, that the Nazis were at first a political party, and they came to power by promising the German people, one, an end to the economic horror that was wreaked on Germany by the Great Depression. They also promised them redresses for what the Germans felt were legitimate grievances forced on their country after the end of the First World War. And again, this is really what the equalists are doing. They are promising, we will, and I'm sorry, let me step back a second. Most of all, the Nazis promised the German people, we will make our nation great again. We will make our country strong again. We will make you proud to be German again. And that is what let them get into office. And again, as I have said before in my previous videos, the Nazis did not seize power. Hitler was elected. But here we see that, yeah, there ain't going to be no election for Amon. But that is really more or less what he is selling. He is telling the non-benders of the city, we will take away your fear. We will make everyone equal. We will force a level playing field on everyone. And while a level playing field does sound good on paper, the price of it is death and death and killing and forcing a genuinely horrible violation on countless people. And I really can't think that any decent person could really stand by and support that once they fully understood just what it was that Amon is after and how he plans to do it. But anyway, on that cheerful note, I think I've said everything that I had to say about this episode. Of course, next week is the big 1-hour season finale. It looks like it's going to be absolutely fantastic. I'm definitely looking forward to it. And until then, as always, please comment, rate, and subscribe. And you can, of course, follow me on Twitter at Hoosier Jedi. And take care and have a good one, folks.